any theology or religion or spiritual path that teaches that some people are intrinsically evil or less human than other people is wrong. In the Celtic Christian tradition, the Holy Spirit is not symbolized by a dove, but by a wild goose. I love this depiction of the holy as a wild goose. If you have ever dealt with geese, you know they can be ornery. Many people can tend to think about the spiritual life as being meditative nirvana and all feeling one with the universe, and it's not all the time. It's often like chasing after or even being chased by a wild goose. In the order of service today, we were going to pass out to you a game you could take home called The Fox and the Geese. That is an actual demonstration of how, well, just crazy chasing goose around can be and how crazy it can be for the geese to chase you. If you look up spirituality in an image database or a photography collection, you will see breathtaking sunrises, neatly raked plates of sand in a desktop Zen garden, a person with a fashion agency idolized body in a yoga pose on a beach against a gorgeous sunset, parting clouds with light streaming down from heaven, a statue of a person seated in a lotus position accepting offerings of incense sticks with smoke swirling skyward. Everything seems to speak of a perfect moment, free of anxieties, difficulties, stresses, and the just plain annoyances of daily life. The music of this spirituality playing in the background of these beatific scenes is echoing native flutes and resonating Tibetan singing bowls and Gregorian chants sung by huge monastic choirs. The spirituality tends to be symbolized by lotus flowers and doves and candle flames. And there are certainly times and moments in the spiritual life like this. But it's not the totality of the spiritual life, nor the only experience of the spiritual life. There's another, more complex, more ornery, more wild goose-ish aspect to human spirituality that I don't think we see represented all the time. If there was an image database for this spirituality, I think it might include things like my large extended Portuguese family shouting over each other at a holiday dinner meal, a professional wrestling bout, people struggling to remain in an inflatable raft as it bounces over Category 5 rapids, military recruits running an obstacle course, a bleary-eyed single parent barely awake shoving the clean laundry in the drawer unfolded. The musical setting is varied depending on who you might be. For me, it tends to be Bruce Springsteen, Led Zeppelin, the Ramones, and the Clash singing about London burning and living down by the river. And the spirituality isn't symbolized by doves and flowers. It's kind of symbolized by coyotes and ravens and wild geese. I think the Celts were onto something when the Christians told them about this Holy Spirit of God moving around in a mysterious, unpredictable way in the world. And they said, oh yeah, we already got that. That's called the wild goose. Like the other tricksters from the world's religions, the wild goose. I think spirituality is the human experience of existing. It's consciousness, emotions, being embodied, thoughts, feelings, it's movement, creativity. It's what's in us that appreciates the fondness of relationship, the arts, sciences. It's the part of us that gets wrapped in awe and shouts in celebration and cries in pain. It's bigger than theology and religion. To rob a person of spirituality is to rob them of something essentially human. And yet, in the name of religion, in the name of trying to delineate and specify the only way to be spiritual and human, Religions and religious leaders have caused lots of harm to lots of people, even to the point of spiritual abuse. And many people find themselves to be enemies of religion and spiritual refugees. As much as I'm trying right now, and as much as sages and people have tried throughout the millennia, spirituality is ineffable, truly unable to be adequately expressed in words, although many words have been and are spent on trying to do it. I felt like I've been a spiritual person since I was a child in many ways. And my life's journey has taken me through Roman Catholicism and into Unitarian Universalism. And I often reflect that one of the reasons I ended up in Unitarian Universalism is because when I left the Catholic Church, all the congregations I visited were unfriendly and unwelcoming until I visited the Unitarian Universalist Church in my hometown of Leominster, Massachusetts. I tried other types of Christian churches. I visited the Congregationalists, the Episcopalians. And when I visited those churches, I am not kidding at all, visited about 4 or 5 other congregations when I left the Catholic Church. No one, not one person, talked to me after the service. When I attended the Unitarian Universalist congregation, I was welcomed as if I were a long-lost friend. And in a sense, I felt like I was, and I'm still here. Personally, with my spirituality, I grew up Catholic and I brought Jesus with me. And I still like liberal progressive Christianity. I like the stories of Jesus, the parables, the welcome to the people who are left out, the implication that taking care of others is doing justice, and taking the side of those who are left out and persecuted and oppressed is required. When my hometown church ordained me as a UU minister in 2007, I had one of the readings was from the Christian scriptures where Jesus stands up in the synagogue and reads from the prophet Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of God's favor. This was the essence of Jesus' teaching for me, and in many ways still is. I think every one of us is anointed, chosen, called, invited to bring the good news of hope and justice and equity, to proclaim release to those held captive for many reasons and in many ways, through injustices, inequity, hatreds, to set free the oppressed, to take their side, to proclaim a year of forgiveness, that everyone is included all the time in the holy, no exceptions. I feel I was very lucky growing up Catholic and my life in Catholicism because I never ran into really horrible aspects. I didn't run into fire and brimstone. I didn't run into the anti-gay crusade. I didn't run into the anti-abortion crusade. And so I feel very fortunate in many ways coming out of that background that I was able to bring with it positives. And I know a lot of people can't. Our trans inclusion course for this current session, session 4, asks us, among other things, to reflect on what stuck with you the most from this session. What surprised you? What brought you pain? What brought you hope and inspiration? And what brought me pain was that I've always felt myself to be deeply spiritual and a deeply religious person. I like my spirituality, but I also like the connection of the religious community. I loved church and church life when I was Catholic, and I still do as a Unitarian Universalist. And as I was going through the materials for this particular session, it came back to me once again that it hurts me that something that's been so central to my life, spirituality, religion, church, has been so damaging and so harmful and even abusive to other people. However you may have been hurt or harmed by spirituality or religion, I hope that this congregation in Unitarian Universalism can be a place of healing, a place of recovery from spiritual and religious wounds. I believe just about everyone has been wounded in some way by the world because of who they are and what they've experienced. Some of my wounds came from my parents' divorce, having depression, my experience of growing up as the fat kid and the kid with asthma. And as I grew up, I felt the spirit of the holy calling me. I got very involved in spirituality, very involved in church. And it hurt when I felt distanced from that religion I grew up in. And it felt joyous to find a religion that let all that flower and come to fruition. And I became really hurt when I couldn't become a religious leader in Catholicism because I wasn't going to live a life of celibacy. And yet, sticking with that feeling I had that this was the draw for me, I ended up being a religious leader, ordained minister in Unitarian Universalism. And for all the other things that have caused me a lot of pain and really disrupted my life, I was never told I was going to hell or that I was a lesser person for having asthma or being fat. I was never told I was an abomination for having depression. And I can only imagine the type of pain others experience at the hands of religion. I wonder if recovering from spiritual wounds is not unlike other types of recovery, except that it deals with the holy, with God, religion, spirituality, things that are supposed to be, at least say in the 12-step journey, a source of help on the way to recovery and the practice of recovery. Must be an extra degree of difficulty to trust a power greater than yourself when that power was used as a weapon against you to tell you you're unworthy, unlovable, or worse. An essential part of spiritual recovery might be finding a path with a power greater than yourself that works for you. In her book, Healing Spiritual Wounds, Reverend Carol Howard Merritt tells the story of someone in recovery in her congregation who found they couldn't use any image of God as they understood it until they framed God as love. That love was the higher power. And I really like that story, especially now with love in our new Unitarian Universalist values sitting at the center of the other values that are important to us. Spiritual wounds can prevent people from developing a spiritual literacy, a spiritual vocabulary, a spiritual tool belt, because theology, ritual, symbols, and prayer and other practices and terms are so often weaponized against them, become sources of pain. Eventually, when and if people who are spiritually wounded engage spiritual recovery or find their own spirituality, it might be more difficult to find the words and concepts to explain the journey, a little more difficult to find the tools and practices of a spiritual life. Because the spiritual life so often takes place in community, in a large sense, that's what religions are, people who are spiritually wounded find barriers when it comes to being part of religious or spiritual community because the spiritual community was the location and source of the wound. If you were harmed and hurt by religion, finding a spiritual community of any kind might even be a heroic journey and process, even though there are religious communities that are far better, more inclusive and welcoming, more loving and compassionate than the ones that hurt people. I deeply value interreligious and interfaith dialogue. We're having a program like that this afternoon. I do not believe any one theology, religion, or spiritual path has a monopoly on truth or spiritual practice. The deep mystery of love and the holy is at the heart a mystery, something we know and feel and intuit even after 20 minutes of somebody talking about it on Sunday morning. But I do believe that some religious ideas, some theologies are in fact better than others. I think some religions are better than others. But my criteria is pretty small for things that are bad. Any theology or religion or spiritual path that teaches that some people are intrinsically evil or less human than other people is wrong. I won't claim to have all the spiritual or religious answers, but I'm pretty certain of this. There is no such thing as a lesser person, and any philosophy, theology, or religion that says so is wrong, categorically wrong. Any theology, religion, or spiritual path that teaches it is the only way is wrong. Because I don't believe there is only one correct way to God, to life, the universe, the mysteries of everything. There's no one and only language, terminology, and way of looking at it. And I advise people to run far away from any person, religion, or group who tries to tell you otherwise. The writer Anne Lamott says, you can safely assume you've created God in your own image when it turns out that your God hates all the same people you do. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people frame God. They frame God and religion based on their hates, so that it affirms their hatreds, their fears, their anxieties, and not love, hope, and compassion. People tend to frame their religion to match their gods. And when God is controlling and exclusionary and punishing, that religion tends to practice hurt and harm and violence and even killing in its name. Hateful, hurtful, violent people create hateful, hurtful, violent religions and spiritualities. Petty, insecure, gaslighting, abusive people create petty, insecure, gaslighting, and abusive gods. My spiritual life has indeed been a wild goose chase, and I know that as wild as my chase has been, many others are far wilder. The spiritual life, human life, is complicated enough. I hope that together we continue to make our congregation and our religious life in Unitarian Universalism one that, even though we might chase geese, finds moments of lotus flowers and doves and sunlight through the clouds. That when people encounter us, they encounter that sense of the holy that says, you're beautiful, and means it. Check out my website and blog at tonylorenzen.com for even more resources that will open your mind, touch your heart, and inspire your spirit.